Right, we'll just wait for a few more attendees to join us and then we'll begin the webinar this morning. We'll be looking at how lockdown has affected school and academy budgets so far, how we will be looking at changing our budget for the year ahead, and how other income and expenditure may be changing due to the lockdown and the subsequent reopening, which is now due to take place for all schools in September. Okay, great. Just see. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see the slides and myself. Good morning. Thank you for tuning in, taking time out of your, what is I'm sure an extremely busy time at the moment, with the end of term coming up shortly and the subsequent, as I mentioned earlier, reopening of the schools in September. First thing I want to talk about is just a little bit about myself and a little bit about Allen Pation & Co. So Allen Pation & Co, we're a firm of chartered accountants based in East London, but we work in and around London, so anywhere kind of in the home counties or in London. We're a firm that specialises in financial management for schools and academies, so helping out with helping out with relieving the stresses of financial compliance, which allow you to concentrate on realistically providing the best education possible, meaning that you can get on with doing what you do best. We're also registered auditors, so we have provided grant assurances in the past, and now we're looking to also offer internal audit services for academies, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And a little bit about myself. I've worked with state-funded schools for the last 5 years, and with independent schools and nurseries for the last 10. And I'm also a governor. You'd be surprised to know I'm the finance governor of a primary school here in Essex, which is where I'm coming from today. So to talk about what we want to go through today, so I just wanted to run through for everybody here. I'm sure it's telling you things that you already know about, but this is just to kind of recap and to give you the benefit of the experience that I've come across with working with other schools. Like I say, for the most part, you would already know these, but obviously wanting to get you to know obviously everything that could be possibly affecting your budget for this year and going forward. So to start off with, we'll look at the budget setting process. So hopefully to kind of bring you up to speed with where you are or where you've been. So for maintained schools, you already set your budget for 2021. So that would have been submitted probably at the end of last term. I know that obviously some schools, including my own, there was some delays in getting that done due to the lockdown happening around the time that budget setting would be done. But hopefully for the most part now you've all completed that. You may have had extension from your local authority and have now done that. And then for academies and academy trusts, so your budget will start from the 1st September 2020, go through to 31st of August 2021. And there has been a postponement to the filing of the budget forecast return for academies and academy trusts. So that was due by the end of this month, and it's now been extended by 2 months to the 29th of September. So it does mean that you need to set your budget. It does mean that you need to get it approved by the board However, it's a case of, as far as the ESFA are concerned, that doesn't need filing with them until the 29th of September. So some small graces there anyway. It is currently open for submission if you are well ahead of the game, which I don't suppose the vast majority of schools are at the moment because of other priorities, but it opened yesterday and is now ready for submission. However, the big change in the BFR this year for academies and academy trusts is that they aren't requiring you to submit 3-year forecasts. Now, that's not to say that you can't do a 3-year forecast, or you don't have to do a 3-year forecast. It is still written into the Academy's financial handbook that this is a must, that trustees need to approve a 3-year forecast. And therefore, the only saving grace is that you don't need to submit that 3-year forecast to the ESFA. However, your auditors, when they come in to do the 1920 audit, will be looking for that 3-year forecast that's been approved, especially as they will be looking to do more going concern work about the continuation of the academy or the trust, just due to the economic climate at the moment. As I say, we'll go through what I've experienced is some of the changes to school and academy expenditure since the lockdown. The first thing being, as I'm sure you've all been involved with at some level, if not completely involved with, is the changes in free school meals. So this has been essentially up to, as far as academies are concerned, up to them on how they wish to proceed. So some have decided to essentially provide food parcels to those children who would normally receive free school meals throughout the lockdown. And others have decided to use their own voucher scheme, but also there is the DFE-backed Edenred scheme, which is open to all schools and academies to register for. This means that that is completely funded by the DFE, so there's no need for you to spend out on that, and it's administered by Edenred, and the vouchers are received by the parents once you register. This has also been announced. The whole free school meals availability has been extended throughout the summer recess this year. So for those 6 weeks that we would normally not be in school and therefore wouldn't normally be providing free school meals, the government has decided to extend free school meals throughout the summer holidays for this year. Where that will go after this holiday, I'm not too sure. Obviously, the plan is to have all children back in school from September, and it's a case of, obviously, I think this is an exceptional circumstance where they've extended this. I wouldn't expect that they would extend it to school holidays in next year. However, it's a case of watch this space. There's been a lot of things that have happened during this lockdown which I wouldn't have expected, so don't take my word for it. But just as my kind of personal opinion is that it wouldn't continue beyond the summer holidays. That's not to say that if you do have children on free school meals that can't attend, that vouchers or food parcels could still be provided. However, as far as extending it through holidays, I don't expect that to be happening. The next thing is IT hardware. Now, a lot of schools that I have worked with are trying their hardest, and in some cases succeeding, in obtaining lots and lots and lots of laptops, simply because they see this as a long-term solution. Obviously, as far as the teaching in schools goes, they want to get children back as soon as possible, as soon as it's safe to. But obviously, as far as everybody keeps talking about a second spike or the next wave, then obviously, we want to continue providing education to children when they aren't actually available or able to attend school in person. And also, some schools have decided that actually, as far as teaching materials goes, it's actually a lot safer and may even be more cost effective to actually do the learning even within school on a laptop rather than providing books and other kind of physical materials there. The next thing I want to talk about is teaching bubbles. So there's been obviously the announcement that within when children return in September, they will be within bubbles. For primaries, that will be per class, and for secondaries, that will be per year group. Obviously, there's a lot of things that you would have done around your risk assessments and things like that to ensure that's possible. And I'm sure you're all busy sorting this out now in your schools. However, obviously there's some expenditure around that. Obviously, any kind of remodeling of classrooms, or remanaging the spaces that you have available, and obviously kind of operationally, that's going to have an impact on how staff, how children are able to move around the school, and also availability as well. Should somebody in that bubble become infected, then obviously that's going to have quite a significant impact on the operation of the school or the trust going forward. So obviously, to prepare yourself for children coming back and staff coming back, obviously you would have had to spend out quite a lot of money on hygiene equipment and materials. So there's hand sanitizer aplenty now, all in schools. There's kind of all of the materials to make sure that surfaces are cleaned. That it's a case of that there are those things available, and to a certain extent as well, PPE is available for dealing with children that have coronavirus or are suspected to have coronavirus in school. Cleaning as far as your cleaning contract or your cleaning staff, that has mainly been increased with the schools that I deal with. They are either engaging cleaning staff to do more hours, so kind of spending more on their salaries, or they're engaging agency cleaners to essentially support their existing cleaning staff or their existing cleaning contract, just so that it's a case of, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, surfaces are wiped clean all of the time, that it's a case of that's really kind of mitigating that risk of spreading the virus. And then obviously, if there's any confirmed or cases of coronavirus where there is deep cleans required, or there's more kind of rigorous cleaning, then obviously that's going to impact on the amount of expenditure on cleaning in the schools. And lastly, agency staff. Obviously, there's been some schools that have obviously not needed their full agency staff. I know some schools have taken to following the procurement notice issued by the government, which obviously states that if an agency worker isn't able to attend, if they're not able to do their work, then they should be paid 80% of their salary, which is the same as the amount that they would be paid if they're on furlough. But because schools are funded by the government, that actually it should be the schools that are paying the 80% rather than the government directly. And otherwise, it's a case of agency staff are either not needed because they have vulnerable children that they are supervising that aren't able to attend school, and therefore there's been a bit of a decrease overall in the use of agency staff, and as well as the number of staff that are needed on site. There isn't as many, or there hasn't been as many kind of requirements to cover staff sickness and absence. However, going forward, obviously once all of the children come back in September, I would fully expect that agency staff, agency expenditure may go up. Like I say, those vulnerable children that aren't able to attend may still not be able to do so. However, obviously, if you've got a bubble and there are staff that are teaching in those bubbles, and all of a sudden there is that an infection in those bubbles, then obviously those staff would need to isolate and quarantine as well. So there may be the need to actually have agency staff to cover those absences. Moving on, so the next thing I think that's been impacted that I've seen is the income in academies and schools. So it's a case of, and we'll talk about the things that haven't changed, the things that have stayed the same shortly. However, I just want to talk about what I've seen has changed. And those fall into the categories of lettings, trips, training, and clubs. So as far as lettings go, you may be letting out, a hall or classrooms to obviously clubs, organisations that aren't, part of the school, and therefore you'd be generating lettings income from that, and that obviously has ceased since the lockdown has happened. I will talk a little bit more about this, how this will impact going forward into next year, into the next academic year. However, at the moment, obviously for those schools that were generating income through lettings, that has fallen off a cliff, and there's been absolutely nothing. And rightly so as well, because it's, there's significant risk there. You can't have the school closed to all but vulnerable and key worker children, and still have lettings going on. So I think it's been a significant impact to some schools, but it has been, unfortunately, the thing that's necessary during the lockdown. Trips, obviously it's a case of, you would have had a number of trips planned for your schools for this term, and it's a case of that for the most part those trips haven't been able to go ahead, or if they have, that they've been postponed into next year. Obviously, I know for a lot of school leavers for this year, that's been a real kind of heartbreaking thing for them to for not just the children, but also the schools as well, that kind of take pride in giving those children a good send off. So obviously that's significantly impacted on your budget this year. Chances are that this academic year you haven't spent out as much on trips, because there's they haven't been going ahead. So and where you've made deposits, or you've paid up front for the trips that are going ahead this term, or were supposed to go ahead this term, then it's worth talking to the companies that you've done these trips through, if you haven't already done so. And yeah, it's a case of that you would need to kind of contact them and talk about what it is that's you should be doing going forward. Just to let you know that we've had a message come through to say that some people are having issues actually getting into Zoom this morning. So I'm very sorry to hear that. I'm sure that Zoom are doing everything they can in order to fix that. But again, apologies to anybody who's unable to attend. The video of this recording will go out after the session today, as soon as that's uploaded online. So you should receive a link within 24 hours. Otherwise, it will be a case of you can look at this video through our website. So going back into what we were talking about, so what has changed with income. So as far as the trips go, yeah, like I said, you should be looking to actually go through that with your suppliers, trying to contact your suppliers. Unfortunately, a lot of people are on furlough still at the moment. However, just getting in there as soon as possible to make sure that you can reschedule or rebook that trip for next year. If not, then looking to apply for a refund. This isn't going to be possible in all cases, but it's just doing what you can, as I'm sure a lot of you have already done so. Next thing I just wanted to talk about was training. So obviously, if you're a school or an academy that's fortunate enough to provide training to outside either teachers or education leaders, so obviously you would have normally been doing a lot of that work in this part of the year. And obviously that isn't obviously available or able to do for the most part this term. again, just because of the restrictions. And it may be something that you decide as a school or an academy next term, whether you want to resume doing those training exercises, that to whether it's worth the income generated to do that, or whether it's something like I'm doing today, which is that you look to possibly provide that online. That's a lot of businesses, including schools and academies, are becoming more inventive, more innovative to keep, providing that value that they would normally be doing. Obviously, first and foremost, it's the education of the children. But obviously, if training is one of the things that you're providing, then it's, certainly worth looking at going forward. And lastly, clubs. So for those schools that are charging for either breakfast clubs or after school clubs, obviously that may not be, kind of your first and foremost, resource. It might not be, kind of the place where you generate the majority of your income. However, obviously, for the number of children, the number of clubs that you run, this could seriously impact on the income that you're receiving. And again, it's one that you look to be thinking about in September, whether it's a case of that you can provide those clubs safely, and whether there is also the actual demand for those clubs as well going forward. Okay, I just wanted to run a quick poll. So we've got a few questions here. So it's a case of that, we want to know from you how your current year budget has changed in respect of the closure and the plans for reopening. So if you wouldn't mind, I'll launch the poll now, answering the first question. So it's, do you think that it's not changed? You've increased expenditure, reduced income, reduced expenditure, or increased income, which I would imagine will be a very few of you. And then the next question is that how your plans for reopening the school in September have affected your next year's budget. So again, has it not changed? Have you planned to increase expenditure, reduced income, reduced expenditure, or increased income? Again, I'm expecting the last one will be the very few of you. And then lastly, how has the lockdown affected your planned 3-year forecast? So it's a case of, obviously, for the next few years ahead, obviously with everything that has changed due to this year, how has that impacted how you're looking at your income and your expenditure in the following years? So so the options there being not changed, made changes based on this year's budget, made changes based on next year's budget plan, or haven't done a 3-year forecast. Okay, so I'll just launch that now. Okay. So we're getting a mixed bag here. So for the vast majority of you, you've put increased expenditure, but also and reduced income, as well as also putting reduced expenditure. So I think obviously where schools have been closed during the lockdown, there hasn't been as much spending on educational resources as far as kind of materials in the classroom are concerned, and obviously if there's been agency staff that haven't been able to work, obviously those costs have been reduced as well. And I know obviously there's overtime normally for support staff, which again that wouldn't have been paid during the lockdown as well. And then as far as how your plans have changed for reopening in September, again, increased expenditure. So obviously as you look to change the school around ready for the return of all children, reduced income again, that would be linked to obviously self-generated, I would imagine, for the most part. And then for the last question, so we've got here that the vast majority have made changes based on this year's budget, but some have said not changed, or haven't done a 3-year forecast, which, as I mentioned earlier, for academies at least, that is a requirement. And it's definitely something as a school that you want to make sure that you're doing going forward, especially if you've got increased expenditure where you're not able to balance the budget, even with the your carry forward from the previous years. So yeah, it's definitely something to keep in mind and to keep working on to ensure that you are in as strong a position as possible financially, so that you can manage any further changes that come along down the road. Okay, so thank you for that. So the next part, I just want to talk about what things have stayed the same. So this is where we've had confirmation from the government to say that these sources of funding are not going to be changing into the 2021 year. Obviously for schools that ends 31st of March next year, and for academies and trusts that's 31st of August. So the government has already confirmed that your GAG funding for 2021, that will be unaffected by the closure, that you will receive that funding into the end of next year, and that essentially you can kind of plan with that in mind. The next thing is early years funding. So as far as obviously attendance for especially nurseries and for those primary schools that have early years settings, the attendance for those has been obviously close to nil during lockdown, and then obviously now they have reopened the early years settings. Obviously a lot of schools and a lot of nurseries are obviously they are worried that obviously attendance is going to be down, as has been the case across all schools, where those children or the parents of the children are feel that it is unsafe for their children to return. However, the government has confirmed that where early years settings that receive government funding stay open, they will continue to receive that early years funding. Where it's a case of that schools have said that they aren't able to stay open, or sorry, nurseries aren't able to stay open, and early years settings in schools aren't able to stay open, then there may well be a clawback from them, but also as well the impact from for those nurseries that aren't that are also receiving funding from parents, that there is no kind of safety net there for that funding. So I know that a lot of nurseries especially are looking at the furlough scheme, where they obviously cannot afford to maintain the staff because actually the majority of their funding comes from parents and is privately funded. So I know that that's having quite an impact. But as far as the state funding goes for early year settings, as long as they stay open, then that is unaffected. Okay, and then next is SEN funding. So again, that's been confirmed that will stay the same throughout the next academic year, or into to the end of 2021. So it's a case of as far as SEN funding is concerned, that again is something that you can plan, and obviously as children arrive in September, then obviously the funding based on the agreement with the local authority, obviously you receive the top-up funding based on the attendance of those children that come to you. Similarly, pupil premium, that has been confirmed as well for next year. However, obviously one thing that you'll be kind of more aware of is obviously that's generated by those children who are eligible for free school meals. So the funding is based normally on the January census, and I know that there's been a delay in processing that January census data. However, the pupil premium funding for April through to March next year, that's regardless of whether you're maintained or an academy, that will be that's already been confirmed, so you'll be receiving that pupil premium funding for that. Next, for those of you in primary settings, universal infant free school meals, that's already confirmed to be continued into next year. That will be unaffected by the lockdown. And similarly, those that are receiving teachers' pay and pension grants, that's also unaffected by the lockdown, and has been confirmed to the end of March for maintained, and the end of August for academies next year. So for those changes that have happened, for the extra costs, for the extra work that's being done for those schools that are obviously missing out on income or having trouble, I just wanted to run through with you briefly what help has been announced for those schools, and there's a vast range of things. However, the kind of the devil's in the detail on these, so it's important to look into them in detail, because otherwise it may be a case of that you're planning for something when you're not actually eligible for it, or you're not able to achieve that funding. So the first thing is, well, across the board, the DfE have essentially reduced the amount of reporting requirements. Now, this isn't necessarily a financial help, but what it does do is it allows schools that are obviously having to deal with reopening, that are having to put in extra efforts and extra resources to make sure they're ready for reopening, already partially reopened, and obviously the full reopen in September, that the DfE isn't requiring nearly as many reporting requirements as they would do normally. This includes for academies, not least the BFRO, which is normally due by the end of May. That got cancelled this year, so that wasn't required from academies and trusts. And similarly, the BFR, which is the budget forecast return, which we talked about earlier, again, just to reiterate, that has been extended to the end of end of September. Sorry. And the only thing I think probably for academies and trusts to note, though, is that there's currently no plan for an extension to the external audit requirements for the financial statements to the year end of 31st of August 2020. So you will still be required to have a full audit in the autumn term. And I know that, having talked to a lot of external auditors, they're already looking to do their interim work now where they can, without obviously attending on site as much as possible, and doing the work remotely. So that's already being booked in, that's already being started on, because at the moment there's not been any extension to the requirement to file those accounts with the SFA by the end of December. But overall, as well, the other things which I'm sure a lot of you will be involved with, obviously, is the summer term census that has been cancelled this year. But again, I think they will definitely be looking to reinstate that for the October census, just because for schools and academies, that is actually what your funding is based on for the following year. So I'm not expecting that they will be looking to cancel that. So obviously, where you need to have your census done on census day, you want obviously as many children in school as possible, because obviously it will affect your funding for the following year. The next thing to talk about is the exceptional costs claim. Now, this is live at the moment. The current deadline for costs that have been incurred by schools and academies is the 21st of July. So that's something that is, if you are looking to make that claim, that you should be doing so right away if possible. They have announced that they will have another window for any costs that are incurred between now and the end of August to do with, obviously, schools preparing to reopen, that there will be another claim window in the autumn term. However, they haven't released any further details on that yet. And the kind of exceptional costs that, and it's been made very made everybody aware in the media, that it's to do with, reclaiming for free school meals, it's to do with reclaiming of cleaning costs, and reclaiming of premises costs as well. However, what hasn't been as widely publicised in the media or by the government is that actually the requirements for this to satisfy the criteria for this claim is actually very very strict. Um, so those restrictions on making the claim are that essentially you can only make this claim if you have actually incurred costs that have actually pushed you into a deficit budget for this year. For previous for those that are looking to utilise reserves that have been brought forward from previous year, then you are able to make this claim. However, it's only if you've got a current year deficit that you can make that claim. If you are looking to make a surplus in the current year, then you aren't able to make that claim, and that is, obviously doesn't take into account that a lot of schools, having been closed, will have had obviously a lot less expenditure in certain areas. It doesn't mean that, because you aren't spending as much in other budget areas, but you're obviously spending more in the areas which they've mentioned, so free school meals, cleaning and premises, that you can still make that claim. So it is purely just on the overall budget for the year. So it's very important, if you're going to look at making this claim, that you have obviously a list of all of the expenditure that relates to those things that you've had to incur on top of what you'd budgeted previously, but also as well that you've got a good idea of your projected outturn to the end of the year, to make sure that actually you are able to make that claim. And those claims vary depending on the size of the school, of how much you can claim if you are eligible. But yeah, it's just really important to make sure that you are eligible before you make the claim, as the ESFA would be looking to recover that money from schools where they have not made they haven't met the criteria to make those claims. So it's really important to look at that. And for the vast majority of schools that I've been speaking to, it means that they aren't actually able to make those claims, just because they've made savings in other areas, which mean that they have, even if they previously not actually budgeted or planned for a surplus this year, that they are actually by default looking at a surplus, just because expenditure has been less in other areas. And obviously, talking about free school meals, that's actually only for those free school meals that have been provided where the Eden Red vouchers couldn't be provided, i.e. the scheme wasn't actually available yet, or where it's a case of that you have not been able to issue Eden Red vouchers because it's not suitable for those parents. So it's a case of, again, there's a pretty tight restriction on that. For cleaning, it's only for those costs where a confirmed case of coronavirus has actually been has been detected, that you can actually claim for those additional cleaning expenses for cleaning after a confirmed case of coronavirus. And for premises, it's only for those cases where you've had to spend additionally to make sure that premises are secure and safe during the lockdown, because the school has been closed. So it's really, really strict of what it is that they actually allow you to claim for. However, I know that some of you will be able to claim for that. So like I say, it's really important to try and get that done as soon as possible. The 21st of July is the deadline, and it's a case of they would be looking to spend that, pay that money out in September for those claims. The next thing is, so the laptops for pupils from deprived households. So essentially those pupils that qualify for free school meals that you receive pupil premium for, some of those will be eligible for laptops, which are provided by the government. And it's a case of the schools that I've worked with, essentially, that they've been contacted by the local authority, who have essentially given them how many laptops they're eligible for. On top of that, there's also the dongles as well. However, I know that for those schools that have received that notification, it doesn't cover nearly as many of their pupils that really do need those. So it's a case of that they are relying heavily on their existing budgets to essentially provide those laptops for the children that do need them to be able to work remotely and safely. Next, I wanted to put this last, but I thought, I'd talk about the things that are currently available first. So coronavirus job retention scheme. For the vast majority of schools and academies, this won't be applicable to you, simply because it's a case of that, as you're funded by the government, and the government is the agency that's actually providing the job retention scheme funds, that they are fully expecting that schools will be paying this out of their budgets if they are doing it, but they're actually heavily implying that you shouldn't be doing it anyway. So it's a case of, as I mentioned before, the procurement notice, which was issued in April by the government, was that essentially schools should be, continuing to pay staff that even if they can't do their job, if they're not able to do their job, then they should still be continued to pay 80% of their salary, rather than it actually being put through the coronavirus job retention scheme application. And like I say, that's simply because the funding is coming from the government, so they're not expecting that funding to be given to schools on top of that. So unfortunately, there's no way of kind of increasing your income, obviously, to make up for the fact that you haven't been able to do that elsewhere. And then, so a couple of things that have just been announced, but these are in the works at the moment. These are big announcements, but they're not necessarily things that are available. We don't have details on those at the moment, but they're definitely things to be looking at in September and also the coming months. So the PE and sports premium, we've been told that there will be an enhanced PE and sports premium for those children that obviously have not been able to do as much PE and as much sport while the schools have been closed. Therefore, the government has announced that will be enhanced. I can't tell you how much by at the moment. It's a case of the headline figure gives you saying that the typical one form entry primary school would receive £18,000. Well, if you're a two form entry, you probably already receive more than that already. So I really can't tell you how much that's going to be. Just to expect that it will be slightly more than it was this year. And then the catch-up funding. So this was the big announcement by the government to say that there's going to be £1 billion injected into schools to make up for those children who have been out of school for a number of weeks. Obviously, they've been doing their best with home learning, obviously with the materials that schools have been providing, and also under the tutelage of their parents. But again, it's kind of a big announcement, but unfortunately at the moment, as things stand, obviously as of today, 9th of July, there hasn't been anything announced on how that's going to be actually divided up, and how that's going to be provided to schools. However, we do know that it will be be there for kind of tutoring for children that have been out of school that need that kind of time to catch up, but also extra resources as well for the schools to provide those catch up sessions as well. The other, I guess, the flip side of that is that they have announced that the Year 7 catch up fund, which was available to secondary schools, has now been scrapped. So obviously, for any of you that have already put through your budget, and I know I have for a number of schools that I deal with that rely, or at least expect some level of year 7 catch-up funding, that you actually won't be receiving that next year now. But it is a case of that you will receive catch-up funding in this other form to do with this £1 billion that they've announced. Next, I just want to talk about what else can be done. So obviously we mentioned earlier about lettings, and it's a case of I'd say really it is a case of you need to speak to your tenants, see obviously if they are looking to return in September. Obviously it depends on your risk assessment. It depends on obviously their level of demand for whatever it is that they do, be it kind of, I don't know, dancing classes or whatever it is. Then it's a case of obviously you need to make sure that can be done, that it's safe to do so, and that obviously going forward that's something that you can start redoing. Next thing is speak to your parents. So as I mentioned before about kind of clubs, so after school clubs, breakfast clubs. Is it a case of that actually your demand's going to be there for those things going forward? Is it that they're very much hoping that September comes around, the parents will be looking to return to full-time work and therefore will be relying on those? Or is it a case of that actually that because now most of us are still working from home, that we're able to, look after our children outside of school hours? So, obviously from a children's perspective, it's a massive loss. But obviously from a perspective of budgeting and the perspective of the schools, then obviously you want to try and be sure that obviously the things that you're running for those children are actually being taken up, that it's worth allocating the resources to make those things happen, rather than it's a case of you're putting on these provisions but actually there's nobody showing up. Because obviously there's a cost associated with that, and if you're not getting any income whatsoever, then obviously that kind of makes it a more difficult thing to do out of your current budgets. The next thing I've put, and I mentioned this in my last webinar about budget setting tips and tricks, especially for this year. I think recasting your budget is going to be really the only way that you'll be able to keep up with all the changes that are going on at the moment. I've managed to set budgets for the next academic year back in May, and the world has completely changed since then, and it continues to do so at an increased rate. So it's really difficult to kind of pinpoint how things are going to happen. This, I think, originally this webinar was supposed to be happening last Thursday, and obviously that was the day that the guidance got released about reopening schools in September. So things have changed since then, and it's a case of obviously I'm not expecting those changes to slow down coming into September, and I think it's just a case of from your point of view, if you're trying to maintain financial oversight and good controls over your income and expenditure, then it's a case of you can't be sat there with a static budget that you think, well, that's been signed off by governors or trustees and therefore that's the budget that we've got to stick to. You may want to talk to your governors, you may want to talk to your trustees about the challenges that you're having, but definitely look at recasting that budget, because without that then you are kind of going in one direction and the world is going in another. So it's really important to kind of look at that where you can, to make sure that you're on track. The next thing I've put is ensure free school meal entitlements are claimed. I think for the vast majority of schools, they were doing that more so than ever, and obviously that will impact as well on your pupil premium funding. So if it's a case of that children are eligible, and you've been able to obviously ensure that they get a free school meal, then obviously going forward, then the amount of pupil premium funding you should receive would go up as well. Obviously that only comes in January, And on the January census, they work out obviously your free school meal or your pupil premium entitlement based on free school meals. But it's also really important as well to notice that, you know, it's a case of that, unfortunately, you know, as much as the government is trying to kind of prop up jobs in the country and make sure people stay in work, is that obviously more and more people are going to be falling below that threshold, which means that their children would be eligible for free school meals. So it's really important to keep a close eye on that and keep checking, because people's circumstances you know, are going to be changing, and obviously that, you know, you want to make sure that you're obviously getting the funding that you need for those children as well. And then the last thing is, it's a really horrible thing to think about, and I haven't really, you know, said about restructuring or anything like that, because, you know, again, I think it's just something that it's worth having in the back of your mind, but you know, you would hate to be in a position where you are having to do it. But I've just put here, look at varying contracts. So for those staff that aren't necessarily doing overtime, because, you know, that you've got a good breakfast club or a good after school club, which is, you know, continuing all year round, then obviously, you know, you may have contracted those staff to provide those sessions, and obviously, you know, if it's a case of that those things aren't going to be continuing next year, or the demand isn't there, as I was saying, speak to your parents about it, is that, you know, that you may not want to keep, you know, obviously providing those contracted hours for those staff, or they may be better redeployed elsewhere. So, you know, it's a case of, you know, you have a contract, you know, you may have somebody who is able to do that club, but, you know, and I don't, you know, don't necessarily mean to kind of say that, you know, anybody can do any job, but it's a case of, well, is it that, you know, the person that's helping run that club in an afternoon or before school, it may actually be better if they did, you know, as a variation to their contract, did some cleaning in that time instead. So they would still be looking to get paid for that time, but it would be a case of that, you know, you're having to redeploy those resources elsewhere. Again, I mean, this is something that's you know, quite a significant impact, but again, it's one of those things, if you're not able to continue as per normal, then, you know, I think it's definitely something to keep in mind for next year. I think that's everything I want to talk about this morning. I'm just having a look here at the questions. I've put my colleague Karen's email address on here, so if you've got any questions after you've attended this webinar, or even if you looked at the video later online, as I say, I think some of you have had a trouble getting in this morning, so apologies again for that. But if you've got any questions at all, I'll put my colleague Karen's email address up here. She'll be happy to look at those questions, and obviously if there's any specifically for me, she'll pass them on. Again, just looking at the Q&As on here, just double check the chat as well. So I don't have any questions this morning, so hopefully everything that I've said has been clear for you. I hope that you've taken from this, you know, some good advice. However, as I say, if you've got any questions, please do contact us and contact my colleague Karen, who will be happy to pass those questions on to me. And likewise, if you feel that you're struggling at the moment with your budget, or kind of, you know, how your budget's going to work going forward, then, you know, by all means do contact us and we'll be happy to help. So last thing for me to say is just thank you for attending. As I say, I know you're all extremely busy at the moment with everything going on in preparation for the end of term. Obviously, you know, September feels like it's just around the corner now, I'm sure. And obviously, yeah, everybody's kind of tight on time, trying to make sure that everything gets done before the schools close for the summer recess. So again, thank you very much for your time this morning. If you have any suggestions for things that you'd like to know about schools or academies finances going forward, then again, email my colleague Karen. She'd be happy to pass those suggestions on to me. I will be running a webinar in August as well, which obviously if you're inclined to, then you're more than welcome to attend for that. Otherwise, though, the recording will be up on our website, alanpatient.com, and I'll be looking to do another webinar in September. That will be primarily aimed at academies and academy trusts, and I'm looking to have an external auditor who does external audits for academies to be attending that webinar as well as a panelist, and therefore she will be able to answer some questions from yourselves and hopefully give you some insight into what it is that auditors will be looking for the 2020 audit this year. The Academy financial handbook's out, the accounts direction I believe has been published as well, so those things are things to be looking at over the summer if you feel inclined. Just to come back to something that I mentioned earlier, so as far as ourselves, so Alan Patient & Co, we're looking to do internal audits. That's because of a change, and I'm sure if you're an academy, you've already been notified of this by your auditors, changing the ethical standards. You're now required to have separate internal and external auditors, and so we're in a position, we are registered auditors, so we can do internal audits for academies, and we've got the experience from kind of providing financial support for schools and academies, so we're definitely in a great position to be doing that, and to be helping out more academies with their finances. Great, so I'll leave you here this morning. Thank you very much again, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you in the next one. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.